maybe medium they call them. Okay, I'm gonna do Sean's thing. Oh, the tea is boiling. It usually goes like this. Okay, I'll put these in here. Take yours out. When I was little, 3 years old, my mom started working at a nursery school, like a preschool, and I got to go there. So I went there when I was 3 and 4. And when I turned 5 and I had to go to kindergarten, I had a lot of separation anxiety. I wanted my mom to go with me to kindergarten, and she couldn't. So the rest of my elementary school years were pretty okay. I did well in all my classes. I always got A's. And when I got out of 6th grade, though, I went to junior high, and all of a sudden, all my like elementary school friends, girlfriends, just got mad at me, wouldn't talk to me again, and never spoke to me again all through high school. So that was kind of isolating. And I think in my high school years, I spent a lot of time in my room alone, and my parents started to worry that I was depressed. But when I was at school, I was bubbly and, excited. I still was a cheerleader from 7th grade through high school, all through high school, and I was the captain of the cheerleaders in my senior year. So I continued to do well in school, except for there was like, I started dropping the classes that I wasn't doing well in. And I instead took foreign languages, like I took German, French, and Spanish. And I really loved foreign languages, and I still do. I'm studying Finnish, and I'm also started studying Russian now, so I could speak to a friend of mine who speaks Russian. With all this stuff all over the door.
Okay, open yours.
Do you want any pickles on your sandwich? Um, I got good grades all through high school. I got scholarships to college. I started going to CW Post College at first, and it was small. It was like being in a high school class, 30 people, talk to the professor directly. I did well, although I was smoking a lot of marijuana. But it didn't interfere too much with my grades. Again, I was getting A's. Then I transferred because I had moved in with my college professor, and that didn't look good for him, so I had to go to a different school. So I went to State University of New York at Stony Brook, and in that second semester there was hundreds of people in the class, and I didn't know any of my professors, and I couldn't understand all of a sudden what they were talking about, and people in the class were asking questions that I didn't even understand. And I ended up dropping out in the first trip to a mental hospital. That's the back of that one?
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder what's on the front.
Oh, yeah, this was one where
I guess I had symptoms of depression more so than bipolar. That didn't show up at first. So I was in there for like 6 weeks. When I got out, I didn't feel any better than when I went in. I didn't find anything therapeutic about whatever they were doing in there. And I hoped never to go back to another mental hospital. However, beginning in 1981, after I was a rape survivor, I ended up in a hospital again. And actually, during my time in New York and 4 times here in Illinois, I ended up in hospitals.
And the way I came up with that title, an old Bob Dylan song from back in the 60s called Girl from the North Country. I just changed it a little bit, Girl from the North Woods, but I was thinking about Bob Dylan, that Bob Dylan song when I trying to come up for a title to this story.
So I was totally devastated, and I was looking for something positive in my life. Make some more tea. Ooh, okay. Coffee is not my cup of tea. Sandy gave me that. Yes, I love tea. And this is raw honey. It's really good for you. In July of 1996, I met Bob Lundin. And he was giving a talk at Lucent Technologies, which was where I was working. Afterwards, I ran up to him and I said, I have bipolar disorder myself. How do you get in front of a bunch of people and tell them some of the crazy symptoms you've experienced? And, how do you talk about this openly? And he said, try it. It's liberating. So then I joined the NAMI Speakers Bureau, and I would go to high schools and colleges and talk about my experience, and people would come up to me afterwards and say, oh, my mom has bipolar disorder, or I have bipolar disorder, or, you know, how, it really was liberating. So then I ended up in the hospital again in 1996. This is the last time I was in a hospital for mental health. When I got out, I called Bob and I said, are you guys done with all the preparations for the Awakenings art show? And he said, no, no, we still have stuff to do. So here we are, 27, going on 28 years later, and we're still doing that stuff.
I'd say my upbringing was pretty, I guess, traditional as far as a Midwest person. I was born in Iowa. Nothing really remarkable as far as childhood goes. Um, you know, had moments of kind of, I wouldn't say intense trauma, but had some medical trauma, which was kind of goofy. A bit through my tongue, really bizarrely, at the age of kindergarten, and that was kind of confusing and scary, and probably was something that was always in my head as a young person. Like, I don't want to injure myself. I don't want to get hurt. But nothing really remarkable until maybe I was a teenager, and parents got divorced, and that was kind of a difficult time, I think. Oh, so I've been playing around with a lot of found objects and objects that I like to use as stencils. So recently I went and bought some random things. I think you could kind of see it on the pieces upstairs, but I've been using like these. I think these are gutter guards, and so I've been using these for stencils, and then I've also been using this, which I think is this is a fluorescent light like cover, and so I've been using a lot of stencils, including like my own homemade stencils. This is something I made a long time ago. So just making my own stencils, you know, with old things, and even I think I have. Oh yeah, a colander. So it's just been kind of a fun effect to use for layering. I was born in the '70s, so that was the '80s, and this was kind of the break out of like, the non-traditional family and the blended family. I definitely think that, during these years, or when I think my symptoms kind of presented, and I don't think it was the divorce, I don't think it was the remarriage or anything like that. I think it was just the timing of it all, just kind of the symptoms just kind of came up. And so it's just been kind of a fun effect to use for layering, just to kind of make sure there's lots of depth. And it's been kind of a fun, just kind of experimental way. But as I got into high school or into college, I think that's where I think the depression, and for me, kind of the moods, bipolar too. So I was experiencing some hypomania, some intense depression, times where you know I'd be depressed, wouldn't want to leave my dorm, or suicidal thoughts, things like that. And really didn't get really bad until I finished college. This is probably, I had maybe a 3-year spell of being in and out of hospitals, in a lot of psychiatric hospitals, suicide attempts, lots of different, you know, dark, dark stuff. So I think, this type of work, which is something I started doing over 20 years ago when I first started doing, I guess I would say I would really first start doing, I guess, more fine arts, or more getting away from writing. And what I would do, I mean, I think, for me, I think I think the depressive stuff was, I think I was afraid. I didn't know who I was. And I really just scared me. I just kind of felt paralyzed. And then I would do washes over it with water, sometimes a clear acrylic. And so I kind of created these kind of washing layers. And so this is probably piece number 30 of this. And so I remember thinking, well, I am, and it's not working. And I think that's kind of what embodied like my early 20s and what depression felt to me. Like everybody's like, figure it out. And I'm like, well, I am, and it's not working. And that was a really dark time for me. Eventually, after moving from, all over the Midwest, ended up coming back to Illinois after college, and living with family, and then eventually being on disability, living in state-funded housing. And that's where I think it got the worst, but also like eventually it got something shifted for me. I when I was doing work really early on with artwork, I really navigated towards darker images. And then obviously the image that was behind us when we were doing our original part of our interview, there's a dark piece there. And that's a really old piece. It's almost 20, I think it is 20 years old. And over the years, I think I've found that not only do I have more things to be hopeful for, I find that I just kind of navigate towards more brighter and lighter colors. And so I think, in and out of hospitals, and really some very eerie situations that I think I had these scary notions of as a young person, because I got my undergrad in psychology, and I was like, that would just be so just terrible and ironic if I ever had to be in a hospital that I was once interning at. And that actually happened to me once. And I was like, this is what happens, you go to school, and then I read this book. I happened to eventually read this book on one day, and it was such a quick read, but the book like really like just kind of I don't know what to say. It just kind of served as a catalyst. And the name of the book was The Greatest Miracle in the World by Og Mandino. And I read the book, and I was like, oh man, this makes sense to me, right? And that same day, the case manager came to my apartment, and he said, hey, I got to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, one of your friends from the PSR groups, or the groups that you go to, he killed himself. He got in front of a train. And And it was the weirdest thing because I just read this book, and I took that information, and the version of me that was really enthralled in depression, probably that would have been a catalyst for like dark stuff. But for some reason, I just kind of listened and took it in, and I think the caseworker at the time was kind of like, "Are you okay?" Like he was expecting this to be like this triggering moment for me that could kind of send me down the dark side again. It's like, yeah, I am okay, and I think from that moment on, I think things started clicking for me, and I don't really know how to explain it. Just like everything started to kind of like get quieter. Everything that was intense became a little bit less intense, and the hypomania became a little bit like something I learned to ride instead of like feel like there's something wrong with me. And the depression, I just felt like I had more tools to know how to manage it. And that's, you know fast forward to maybe the last 10, 15 years, and I got my master's in social work 11 years ago. I graduated 11 years ago. And, uh, and my wife and I bought this house almost 10 years ago. We had our daughter a little bit over 7 years ago, and things are going the right direction. I work in private practice now. I have my license. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm not really a superhero, but that I have there's two sides to me that I sometimes do feel like I have to keep the lives separate, which it just feels necessary. I hope someday when I'm older, I feel old right now, but I hope someday when I'm older, those lives will be a little bit more like fluid. But it does seem that, I don't know, it just seems to make sense right now.
I'd say I had a fine childhood. It was normal. I was a happy kid, you know. My family had issues, you know, all families have issues, but basically, I remember having a lot of fun and good relationship with my sister, although we were kind of sibling rivalries, actually. But my father was a college professor, and I lived on college campuses. That's a wonderful place to be able to live on a college campus. He was a professor at Hamilton College in upstate New York. And he had some problems with the chairman of his department and with the president of the college. So he left on fairly short notice and went down to Tennessee and started the psychology department at the University of the South in a town called Sewanee. You know, it's kind of known both as Sewanee and the University of the South. Well, as a young kid, this is 1964, I adjusted fairly easily because I was only 8 years old. But my parents, I think, had a harder time adjusting. You know, Sewanee was a nice little enclave, but outside of Sewanee, it was regular small town Tennessee, with all the characteristics of a small southern town. So anyway, I didn't have very good education growing up in Sewanee because the public school really wasn't that good. And then I also went to a Sewanee Elementary, which was better than South Junior High, where I went to for junior high school. But in ninth grade, I was able to go to St. Andrew's School, which is a private Episcopal school just outside of Sewanee. I thrived there. I had so much fun and did so many things. I was the photography editor of the yearbook, took picture after picture, taught myself darkroom techniques and developed film. And, it was just a really great place to put your energy, that I put my energy. I was also one time the editor of the school newspaper, and I played guitar. I played guitar in the Rejoice Band, which was a choir that did the Episcopal Mass to rock music, and I played electric guitar. Anyways, that was a very successful experience, and then I went off to Kenyon College. It's a fine college, but I can't say I really loved it. I started off as a drama major and working in the building props and building sets, and did a little bit of acting. But I kind of had cold feet about going into a career in the theater, so I changed to a psychology major. My father was a psychologist, and my sister was a psychology major, so I followed their footsteps. And I was having a real good time. My junior year, I spent abroad in England, which was a tremendous experience, and I remember that very fondly. But then graduating from Kenyon, this is 1978, I was having the first part of the problems with my mental illness, and it showed itself as not being able to have a realistic idea of where to go, not having realistic goals, not being able to decide what to pursue and what to go to, and what kind of business I'd want to get into. I just couldn't do that. And so finally, my sister, who was in business, she said, Robert, get an MBA. It's the hot ticket right now. Get an MBA. So I managed to get into a graduate business program at Vanderbilt University, got into it at the last minute. But I was terribly unhappy and didn't like the curriculum. I knew nothing about accounting or finance or marketing. I knew nothing about those things. And so anyway, going into my second year of graduate school, the first year I did okay. I made good grades in courses I liked and mediocre grades and everything else. But the way it turned out that in my second year in graduate school, it's when I had my first major psychotic break. I remember it fairly clearly, and what was the outcome is that actually I drove myself to a hospital, and they admitted me to the psychiatric ward, and I think diagnosed me with schizophrenia after 10 days. Tried to get me back into classes. They told me I just had an adjustment disorder or something like that. They wouldn't tell me I was schizophrenic. And didn't work, and so I had to leave, and I went home, and I got very depressed because I'd never really failed in anything before. Didn't know how to cope with it. Well, I managed to do well to recover from the depression, and I was hired as the assistant director of admissions at Swanee. Well, this was quite a good job. It's quite a little bit of a prestigious job for a young person in the university. And my job was to go to high schools in the area on recruiting trips. And so on a recruiting trip to South Carolina, I became very psychotic again and had all sorts of anxiety, and had to leave the recruiting trip, went back to Swanee. The director of admissions he must have learned that I had a psychiatric problem, and he just fired me. He said, get out by sundown. I mean, there was no reaching out to me to try to help me whatsoever. So I went into a very serious depression after that. As I said, I'd never failed at anything, or I had failed at graduate school, but I thought that was a one-time problem. Well, my problem after that became not the depression so much as hypomania and mild delusions. I had what are called delusions of reference and some grandiose delusions. This went on for many years. In the process of doing that, I became very interested in horses. Horses I found to be very therapeutic, and I became almost obsessed with them, as much as obsessed as somebody who has a mania. You can imagine what that is. And I bought my own horse, and I had a business which I took on the road around the United States. I took it all over the East and West Coast horse circuits, selling merchandise for the U.S. equestrian team. I thought I had a mission to save the U.S. equestrian team from themselves, saves them from whatever their problems were. And so I managed to get in with a businessman who had the license to produce the U.S. equestrian team logo on shirts and T-shirts and hats, etc. And I sold those at horse shows all over the United States. Well, I was having a kind of a grand time doing it, but I was losing a lot of money, and so finally I had to close down the business. But that was not before I had actually left Swanee finally and gone to Glen Ellen, Illinois. I was up there for a steeplechase event. And so I decided to stay. I would break my ties with my parents, which was, I think, is a good thing, and live in Glen Ellen, Illinois. I didn't really have a job, didn't know anybody. I just wanted to live there. Well, as you could imagine, the psychosis came back again, and it was much more serious this time. So I was hospitalized once, and then it came back, and I was hospitalized a second time, and then it came back again, and I managed to get to Evansville, Indiana before I was driving back down to Tennessee because I knew I was very sick, and I wanted to be with my parents. And so in Evansville, Indiana, a psychiatrist seemed to get it right. And he said, well, no, we'll keep you on the mood stabilizers you're on now, which have been doing a fairly good job keeping me straight. But we're going to add an antipsychotic to your mix. And so I started taking one called Navain. Not a great drug, but it really did a lot of good for me. And the right mix of medications made all the difference to me, because no longer was I having problems with my mind going off into psychoses, but I was able to come up with realistic goals. And this was probably the biggest benefit of these medications, was that I could have realistic goals and do things that were reasonable. So I took my photography business, or my photography interest, up to Glen Ellen and started doing photographs for the local newspapers. And they found out I could report, so I got beats reporting, local politics. And then eventually I got to work for the University of Chicago, and before that with the Chicago Tribune. I was a freelance reporter for the Chicago Tribune, and as that happened, a research assistant and assistant editor at the University of Chicago. So that was a real comeback that was important in my life. Now, things have not been perfect since then. I've had other hospitalizations, but more or less I've embarked on something that's a reasonable and doable career. And, I've had a lot of good times, and I feel a lot of successes doing this. In 1996, I founded the Awakenings Art Show, which later became the Awakenings Project. In 2000, I was the founding editor of the Awakenings Review, which is a literary review that we've been publishing for 23 years now. Things have just been going well for me. And it was a little bit like when I was at St. Andrews and engaging in all the different extracurricular activities. I'm doing that a little bit now with the Awakenings Project and a video project, and and a new website project, etc. So life is treating me well now. Not perfect, but well.
I came to the United States with my family in the year of 2000 when I was 5 years old. A lot of things were different when you first come to a new country. It's a little bit difficult grabbing the language and understanding the different vowels and different rules of English. Where does the punctuation go? Where does the comma go? Things like that were a little bit difficult for me. But other than that, I acclimated really nicely to the culture, to the people, and it was very comfortable living here since I came here when I was young. So when I first noticed I had like a little bit of anxiety and depression issues or problems that were becoming more problematic because I wasn't able to cope with anything that was going on at the time, or I wasn't able to understand what was going on at the time. So it was very, I would say, hard on myself. I was very hard on myself because I wasn't understanding what was going on. With anxiety, things creep up on you and you just don't know how you feel and you don't know why you have anxiety. So when you're anxious, you just don't know why you're anxious if you never experienced or never dealt with anything or even know what anxiety or depression is. So it was very difficult for me at the time. When I was in high school, dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression, I also developed a kind of eating disorder that was happening that I wasn't aware of because I was just not coping with my depression and my anxiety. And then on top of that, slowly developing an eating disorder and not knowing why I felt a different way or why my relationship with food changed, on why I can't eat now this and why I'm okay with that. And then whatever I was capable of eating turned into the don't eat category because of X, Y, and Z. And that was also very difficult to deal with. So on the very end of things, when it comes to the bad part of my eating disorder, when I developed it, first developed it, I wasn't sure and wasn't aware of what was going on. And if you don't see yourself in a very normalized way, the way you look in the mirror could be morphed and distorted, and you may not know that it is not looking right or this doesn't look like this. What other people see is quite different from what you see. So that was going on with me. I got to the point where I was 85 pounds almost and wasn't consuming anything but water and had to be hospitalized a few times because I was very malnourished. And it was a very difficult point in my life, and I wasn't even able to understand why I was going down or why I was losing so much. Just things that you can't control, things that are very hard to understand and grasp. So yes. Yes. So when you don't really see things normally and when you don't really know what's going on with you, you start to think a lot of strange thoughts, very strange and unusual thoughts. And that's what goes on. And that's what went on in my mind. I thought things were contaminated, especially food. So I wasn't able to eat normally and wasn't able to digest food normally. The mind is very powerful. It's very powerful in what it allows you to think and what it allows you not to think, actually. So that's what was going on with me. If you don't really know what's going on with you, it's very hard to get down, and it's easy to fall down that rabbit hole. So, how I was able to recover from my very deadly eating disorder was I was able to put everything that was mentally, that I wasn't able to see, that was in my mind mentally, and was able to give it a picture. So, anything that was mentally distressing or giving me anxiety, I put a picture to it. So, if I felt like the food was in a way contaminated, I drew it. So then I saw the way I see things in my mind, which gave me a comparison between what is real, what is reality, and what is actually in my head, and what is on kind of like borderline paranoia in a way. I was able to see that line, and it's a very thin line, by the way. And your mind does not understand it when you're at that point of sickness. It's very difficult to come out of it. But you gotta try to, see what you see in your mind. So give it a visual, and that's what helped me. So I take medications for my anxiety and a lot of other things that I deal with, and it's helped tremendously. It's given me more of I think a blanket, so that if I fall, I don't fall hard in a way, if that makes sense. I'm able to cope more and just deal with life a little bit better. So today I think, I want to say 140, going on 145. And I'm doing wonderful from the experience of actually being almost 70, 80 pounds. I've been doing wonderful, and God has given me the blessing to continue. What I did to put on weight is basically just eat what I was comfortable with eating, and just kind of doubling that dosage, if you want to say that. So the amount of food that I was eating, I slowly kept on going. You just kind of have to go little by little, because your body will reject it if you go instantly eating a huge amount of food that your body is not used to. Instantly, your mind and your body will reject it. So just kind of go slow. If you can have a few pistachios, if you're comfortable with it, then go ahead. And then maybe, next week, add another ounce to that. Whatever keeps you going is what you need to fuel your body. And I say, just do it. So my recovery journey and where I am now really is night and day. I feel like I grew in the last 4 years than I have ever grown in my life. And I have nothing but my support system to thank. What I do now is I work a 9 to 5 sort of say job. And I'm very happy with what I do. A lot of it has to do with diagnostics. A lot of it has to do with customer service. A lot of it has to do with just basically problem solving. And that's what life is. Life is all about problem solving. If I am stuck with a problem, it's the tools on how to cope with whatever problem you have in your life. And mental illness and mental issues and mental disorders, they don't discriminate. Whether it's physical or mental, it doesn't discriminate. So you just kind of have to keep going and just, have hope and just keep going, problem solve. If I have problems with this, how can I solve it? There's always a solution. And I'm living proof.